When I was a kid in the 80s, my family got our first remote control. I thought it was the most absurd invention ever. How lazy were we that we couldn't even get up to change the channel? Now we don't even have to leave our couch to go shopping, banking, or surfing, if kids these days even surf the web anymore. Adam Grant recently posted on Instagram that dial-up internet is the Xennial equivalent of walking to school both ways uphill. Yep. Parents today are at an interesting time in history where digital pioneers like me, who just vaguely understood what the World Wide Web was when I graduated from high school, are parenting alongside digital natives who held that world in their hands in high school. We're all actively inventing digital culture together as a society, but also in our own homes. This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. I've been meaning to do a series of episodes about managing screen time since the beginning of How She Moms, and I've been doing interviews on the topic since 2018. But I kept waiting to start an official series until I felt like I had a handle on tech use in my own family. Spoiler alert, that has not happened. I feel as conflicted as ever about how we use technology in our home and how it affects our family culture. And it still takes up so much of my time and energy. My kids just keep getting older and getting more devices, and technology keeps changing. And honestly, that's the boat we're all in together for the long haul. Trying to stay afloat on the ever-changing tides of technology, capsizing from time to time. So I guess now is as good a time as any to pool the research I've been doing for all these years and share it with you, as long as you know I'm still treading water right along with you. This episode kicks off a series of 3 or 4 episodes about screen time. I'm still working on it, so I'll keep you posted. The first episode will focus on the strategic level, creating a healthy family culture around technology. We're also going to buoy ourselves up in this episode by talking about some of the positive things about technology and how it can help us connect. Also, that's the last of my boating references for this episode, I promise. Then the next couple of episodes will go into more detail about the tactics and logistics different moms are actually using to manage screen time in their families, how they set and enforce boundaries. I've already released interviews with 2 of the moms you'll hear from throughout the series, episode 67, How Andrea Manages Screen Time, and episode 107, How Catherine Teaches Kids to Manage Technology. So you can go back and listen to those if you want to hear more from Andrea and Catherine, which you probably will because they're amazing. Anyway, the reason I wanted to focus on tech culture first is that I feel it's the biggest challenge for me and maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. Over the years, my biggest mistake has been unintentionally setting up tech as a battlefield. I'm this crusader against tech, and guess which side my kids are on? What I'm working toward is a healthy, more peaceful culture of curiosity and collaboration where we work together to find balance and use tech intentionally as a tool, not as an obsession or a distraction. Ah, a mom can dream. But actually, the dreaming is important. Thinking about what our ideal tech culture would be, asking our kids what their ideal would be, and talking about the big picture together. To help us start these conversations with our own families, I've organized advice from 7 different moms into 7 ways we can create a positive and healthy tech culture in our homes. As we begin this series, remember that you'll hear from moms whose boundaries are both tighter and looser than your own. I always try to find different opinions, but I feel like screen time is an area where many of us feel especially vulnerable. So try not to feel either guilt or judgment. We're all doing our best. The first tip is probably the most important tip, which is why I put it first. Don't be afraid of screens. Your children will smell your fear, and that puts them on the defensive and it cripples open conversation about tech. Can you tell I know this from experience? I think it's probably what started the battlefield culture I mentioned. But as we'll discuss more in the next episode, there are a lot of things to fear about technology. There are the big ones, pornography, exploitation, manipulation, addiction, depression, and the smaller yet more pervasive ones like wasting time, comparing themselves to others, FOMO, and commercialism. Andrea Davis is the founder of Better Screen Time, which she started shortly after getting her oldest daughter her first phone. Her family had been remarkably screen-free up to that point. They even kept their TV in a closet and just brought it out from time to time like a crock pot. She felt unprepared for the world of teens and tech, so she did what Andrea does best. She researched the heck out of it and soon realized that she should share this research to help other families navigate screen time. Now she teaches courses, writes books, and speaks to teens and parents, including you right now.
As I was looking for resources, I felt like there were two camps. There was like really fear based information. And then there was just like the free for all where parents were like, oh, this is the world that our kids live in, give it to them and let them learn how to use it. And I thought, okay, where's the middle ground here where, yes, we do live in a digital world, but how can we really mentor our kids and not just monitor them or not just say no? And I thought there must be some happy happy middle, and that's when we started Better Screen Time. And my main goal has always been to help parents worry less about tech and connect more with their kids. That's my goal, and that was really what my main concern is with my own family and with other families, is seeing that technology can get in the way of those relationships, whether that be in a marriage or between a parent and a child. And so how can we enjoy technology and use it without letting it get in the way?
Andrea has definitely succeeded in these goals as far as my family goes. She's been a go-to source of education for me whenever I feel the fear and uncertainty welling up. I love her focus on relationships. You can find her plentiful resources at betterscreentime.com and on Instagram at betterscreentime. The second tip is to assess your current screen time culture and examine your values. I'm going to pepper you with 10 questions you can use to evaluate your own family here. If you want to find the whole list after you listen, you can go to the transcript of this episode at howshemoms.com. The first question is, how much time are we spending on screens? Every once in a while, I take a look around and I see that whether we mean to or not, as a family, we're treating screens like they're our number one priority. Because the way you spend your time shows what you actually prioritize. There have been times when some of my kids have definitely prioritized Minecraft over homework, TV over living in a clean home, Instagram over face-to-face interaction. And there are times when my husband and I prioritize scrolling on our phones to interacting with each other or our kids. One of my weaknesses happens to be word games like Wordle and Waffle. The idea isn't to feel guilty every time we choose to spend time on a screen, but to take a step back and look at what amount of screen time we're comfortable with, what feels healthy, and when the scales start to tip. The second question is, when do we spend the most time on screens? Are there specific times of day that we just default to screens? The third question is, why do we use our various devices? For what purpose? When my niece got her first phone, my brother Brad Singley and his wife Meg were very good about teaching her that it was a creative tool. The only apps she had at the time, besides basic calling and texting, were apps to help her make movies, music, take and edit photos, etc. It was a great way to introduce the phone as a tool instead of a form of entertainment or distraction. The fourth question is, where do we watch screens? Where are the TVs and computers located in your home? Are phones or laptops allowed in your kids' bedrooms? Do they use them there anyway, like they do in our house? Because I'm not very good at monitoring them. Do you have a charging station? One thing I am happy about in this category is that every home we've lived in, my husband and I have been very intentional about not having a TV in our main living area because we don't want it to be the main focus and seem like our biggest priority. I've liked this, partly because we don't have TV noise in our kitchen and living room. It also has downsides, though, because when the TV's in a main area of the house, it's easier to keep tabs on what people are watching and when. There's no right answer here. The fifth question is, what are our tech pain points? What drives you crazy about your family's screen habits? When do screens seem to instigate fights or disconnection? The sixth question takes a little different tack. How do screens have a positive impact on our family? We're going to talk more about that at the last part of our podcast today. The seventh question is, are we as parents too controlling or too lax about screen time? And do our kids think we're too controlling? This is a big struggle for me, but I felt better about it after talking to Dr. Catherine Perlman, a licensed clinical social worker who wrote an excellent book called First Phone, A Child's Guide to Digital Responsibility, Safety, and Etiquette. Here's that part of our conversation. So one of the things I struggle with the most is that kind of seesaw of like micromanage, then I'm like, oh, I'm micromanaging. I'm going to give them some freedom. And with either the amount of time they spend on TV or video games or the amount of time I'm giving them on social media, things like that. How do you navigate that balance between, like, I guess, agency and micromanagement?
So I think on some level, that kind of seesaw approach is great, because I think as long as you're regularly kind of reassessing, then I think you can make changes as needed. I think that that's okay. We can't know everything. Sometimes there's unintended consequences or something we didn't foresee, and now it's just gotten out of hand. I will say, when I was writing the book, I looked at my own screen time usage, which I had never done before, and I was horrified by how much time I'm spending on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, hours and hours a day. And so I added a limitation to my phone so I can only spend an hour a day, max total. But it's something that I didn't think about. I didn't even realize I was doing. So I think that kind of seesaw is okay. And parents should give themselves a little bit of a break. Like, this is hard stuff. We can't know all the time how to handle. But I do think, parenting changes as our kids get older. Like, the way we parent a 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds is really very different than how we should be parenting a teenager. And we need to shift to less micromanaging, which is hard for all of us, to more empowering. And I once heard Julie Lythcott-Haims talk about this issue of adulting and saying that our job as parents is to put ourselves out of a job. And that just really struck me. And I think about that all the time. And I recommend that to parents. Is what you're doing actually helping your kid learn how to manage themselves in the real world? Or is it just you worried about the dangers? Instead of worrying about the dangers, educate your kids so they can make good decisions, and then give them a little bit of some space, and then let them work on it, and then give them a little bit more space. So progressive independence is what we should be going for. And I think as parents of teenagers, it's hard for us to let go, partly because we can sense they're moving out of our realm. And sometimes we grasp on harder, or we feel just so good doing something for them. It just makes us feel close to them. But we shouldn't be doing for them all the time, because then we're sending them out in the real world unprepared.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a balance, but I do like the idea of really shifting the way we parent as our kids age. I think that's really important. And I also think that's what preserves our relationships with them.
You can listen to episode 107 to hear the rest of our conversation, and you can find Catherine at thefamilycoach.com. The 8th question is one that Andrea already talked about. How do screens impact our relationships and connections? The 9th question is, what is screen time replacing? Be careful with this question, because it's easy to talk yourself into the idea that your child would become a world-class pianist or guitar player or artistic genius if only they would get off their phone. Sometimes screen time is replacing nothing. And even that can actually be a bad thing. I've been thinking about this idea since I learned the term solitude deprivation from the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. I think we all may be suffering from this these days, to varying degrees. When is the last time you just sat alone with your thoughts in silence? I mean, I obviously love podcasts, but sometimes you just need quiet. Sometimes we, and especially our teenagers, need to stop defaulting to popping in our AirPods anytime we feel a lull. One of the main benefits of quiet, and yes, even boredom, is that it forces us to think and be creative. I love Chanel Nielsen's thoughts about this.
So with my younger kids, I am very if you're bored, the last thing I want you to do is watch TV. And that'll often go together. I'm bored. Can I watch TV, or can I use your phone or whatever? Right. No, absolutely not. No, you're bored. This is awesome. Something great is about to happen. But for my older kids, they aren't telling me they're bored. They're just hanging out on their phone. And that's really my biggest concern, is you are dulling your senses, and you're missing that boredom piece where all these amazing things are going to happen. But it's when they step away. My high school son will go out and do woodworking in the garage, or he'll go skateboard and stuff like that, if he doesn't get distracted by his phone.
Right.
So a balance, I don't know. It's a continual process. Sometimes it's just reminding him, or even pointing out to him, hey, how long have you been on your phone? And he knows. I don't have to really say more than that. Oh, and then next thing I know, he's out riding his skateboard. So, but I think it's such a challenge as a parent. We're still navigating that one.
Chanel is a coach for moms at chanelnielsen.com. The 10th question is, are we using screen time as a reward, and is that a good or bad thing? I threw in this controversial question because it's one I've thought a lot about. I've read many things about how we need to be careful that we don't use screen time as a reward for getting chores done or other behaviors. Like, I'll let you have some screen time if you clean your room, or if you leave the park without throwing a tantrum, you can have some iPad time. The thought there is that if you use screens as a reward, you make it seem even more enticing to your child. On the other hand, you also probably want to teach your kid that they have to get their work done before they turn on the boob tube. Another phrase that shows my age. I don't think anyone uses that one anymore. After thinking about it and experimenting, I've come to the conclusion that this is a very child-dependent situation. Some kids have electronic time so high on a pedestal already that using it as a reward isn't going to affect that status one way or another. But other kids may be really influenced by reinforcing screen time as a reward. Alex Fales agrees.
There is a lot of truth to that, in my opinion. Like, it does give the screens power, right? It makes like screen time seem better than other things. It's kind of the same concept as like not using treats as a reward for eating vegetables, because it makes, just serve it all together. So that's like the concept behind it. So I think if you can make that work, that's awesome. But also, every person and family is unique, and maybe that works great for you. Like, I was just talking with my sister, and over the summer, she started, like, once they were done with their chores in the morning, they could watch an episode of TV. And she's like, this is amazing. Like, this is like, it was just so good for their family. She has one son who's very high energy, and like, he would get his chores done so fast, and then he would watch TV while the others could like finish their things in peace, and like, it just worked so well for them for that season of life. And so I think sometimes we get so caught up in like, I'm going to ruin my child if I do it this way. Like, we just hear like bits and pieces of advice and information online that we get like, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. But like, take a step back, take a deep breath, and like, maybe that's what works for you for that season. And that's awesome. And you know your child, and you know what's best for them. Anyways, there's my 2 cents about that.
I totally feel this. When my kids were little, getting them off to school could be a nightmare. One of the things that worked for a long time was to let whichever kids were ready have iPad time in the car. That got them motivated to be not only ready, but in the place they needed to be. And we were way better at being on time for school when we were doing that. When I remembered this for this podcast, I actually started doing it again because my kids just suddenly all got into Duolingo, an app that teaches you how to speak Spanish. Now I have a rule that I don't let them play Duolingo before school unless they're totally ready and in the car. Okay, so once you get an idea of where your tech culture is right now, it's time to dream. To envision what you want your culture to be. I know we're dreaming, but be a little bit realistic here. If you were raised pre-internet like me, you may have dreams of your kids living in an analog culture and only watching cartoons on Saturday mornings and Saved by the Bell after school, but that's not the world our kids live in. What would a balanced approach look like? How would you like your family to use screens? What do you consider healthy screen habits? You can get really granular here and imagine a typical day in this ideal culture. Then ask the rest of your family what their ideal would be, without judgment. There will be differences in these visions, but that's a great jumping off point for conversations. Kailan Carr is a great example of someone who decided early on that she didn't want screens to ever be a default. Before I share her comments, know that she's not judgmental about families who use screens more than she does, like mine. But she's a great example of someone who decided what kind of tech culture she wants and then put in the work and creativity to make it happen.
My kids were born around the time I say as an iPad. It was new and it came out about the same time. And so it was like the greatest new thing. Like, this is really cool. And then I started to notice patterns with my kids after using it. And I just, like, that mom intuition at that time, I was like, I don't like the way they're behaving and they're acting, and I'm gonna put this away, and it's not for us. And now, like, all this research has come out and proven like it's actually, has effects on their brain development, and too much is not great. So my mission and focus is to help parents and grandparents have screen-free activities.
Kailan remembered a quiet book she had as a kid. You know those cloth books that have lots of fun activities for young kids? And decided to make one for her own kids. She enjoyed it so much that she started a swap with friends and now has expanded it to a thriving company called Quiet Book Queen.
I have been intentional. I've experienced the devices, and we, would use them for potty training as an incentive. And I mean, I've been there. I know it's not the best thing to do, but I was doing it. And I realized that's just not something that I wanted to be a part of our family. And I knew from like before having kids, I was a teacher, and I just knew that I wanted my kids to be able to entertain themselves and not have to rely on these devices. So when we bought our kid car, I did not want a portable DVD system or, any kind of media system in there before I even have kids, because I didn't want that temptation. And I thought, you know what, if it's out of sight, out of mind, and if we do need something, I can always bring something in later. But we watch TV. I used TV when they were little as my break because I was a stay-at-home mom and the days are long, and I totally get that. And so we just stuck to slower paced shows that Daniel Tiger was a favorite in our house. I know Bluey's a big one now, but my kids are older now. But
Yeah.
similar type shows. We avoided YouTube because it's just, it just goes on and on and on. And I didn't want to give my kids that control. Now that they're older, at age 8 and 10, they're in school. And so they get a lot of screen time at school through their assignments and the activities there. So I just say no screen time on the weekdays, because you've had it at school and you have other things to do when you get home. And then on the weekends, we usually have like just a family movie night, TV show, like Lego Masters is on right now. And so that's a family show as they get older. And I keep telling my kids, because I read the book Glow Kids by Nick Cardaris, and he talked about like the addiction aspect of like video games and how the brain is not developed yet to handle all that stimulation and the dopamine trickles that they get. And so in his book, he recommended about age 10 for being able to handle video games. So I've told my kids, just like, not yet. Like, you'll get to play games. I have great memories of Mario Kart when I was a kid, but like, we're gonna wait because your brain has some growing to do, and it needs to you need to focus on those foundational skills. Like, I'm not telling them that, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. I want to build my kids foundational skills to be able to know and experience how cool tech can be when they know like the old-fashioned way. Like, if you just give a kid a iPad to color on with their finger, it's like they're not experiencing coloring with crayons. And I want them to know that. And then when they get older and can use, like Procreate as a tool and actually use it for like design or for illustrations, like then they'll understand like, oh, this is really cool. Like, you can just delete without having to start all over again.
Yeah, I like that you still have a positive approach, that you're not like, tech is bad, keep it away.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a tool and we talk about it all the time. I just believe in open conversation, and so they know my reasonings and the research. And when I come across a new topic, I'll share it with them and say, oh, look at what scientists have found about this now. And I definitely know that we're waiting on smartphones and social media. I've signed the Wait Until 8 pledge, and that's just some area that I want kids to be kids, and they do not need to be in that world yet.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for moms who just think, yeah, I believe that, I get it, but it's just so hard. They want their screens, there's tantrums. What do you say to encourage them and to help them find some screen-free alternatives that are similarly low effort for those times when you need low effort?
Right? Yes. Well, I have to just say that I know like screen time is the easy route. It is like completely, like, it can be a godsend from parents to like, this is so easy. I can just put it on it. They're quiet and they are engaged and it works. But you have to think of it as an investment. in the long run. And like I put in the hours. I was the mom who would pack up all the activities and have my diaper bag to go out and about, carry around my quiet book. I had the messy house because kids were playing and had all the things out. But now it is paid off just huge. I like it's this investment and I'm like reaping the rewards right now because my kids know how to entertain themselves and they don't need a screen. They turn to books on Saturday mornings. They'll get up and just read and I can sleep later. And I'm like, okay, this was worth it. This was so worth it. But I do understand that it is very tempting. So some suggestions that I would give are to keep like a special drawer, like you said, like special things and special places that they can play with. So like when my kids were little, I had a kitchen drawer that I just put toys and different busy bag activities and things in there and magnets on the refrigerator. So those were things when I was cooking dinner, like they could be near me and they could be in there if they chose. And if they wanted to just go play on their own and do their own thing, that was fine. But it's definitely, they want to be close to you, and you just make it easy on yourself. And then another really good idea that we use often is podcasts for kids or online stories, because that keeps them quiet and still, if that's what you're looking for, if you need like a rest time. But it's not that overstimulating portion of the screen. It's just listening. And then they can do like a coloring activity, or you can just sit with them and listen, or you can be, involved in other things.
I love Kylan's commitment and creativity. She has so many great ideas wherever your own family's screen time habits fall on the spectrum. We'll talk more about the wide range of screen time boundaries in the episode about managing screen time. Our fourth tip is to have open and ongoing conversations about technology in our families. These can be formal family meetings or just casual conversations as situations come up. Better if they're not freakouts like happens at my house more often than I'd like to admit, when my house is a mess and I need help and I realize every kid is on some kind of screen or another. Or when I can't sleep and I decide, oh, this is a good time to check out the screen time app to see how much time my kids have been spending on their phones lately. That's when I do my best overreacting and my kids wake up to all kinds of excessive limits and restrictions. Not the healthiest way to handle it, and the opposite of open communication. Andrea Davis, on the other hand, is so good at screen time discussions that she wrote a book about it called Creating a Tech-Healthy Family, 10 Must-Have Conversations to Help You Worry Less and Connect More with Your Kids. I've used her book with my family, and it's wonderful. You can buy it on Amazon, and the Kindle version is only $5. I asked her to tell us about the first conversation in the book.
As I was looking for information, I came across an article that I really loved by Richard and Linda Eyre, and it was all about don't tell your kids the screen time rules, decide on the rules with them, decide on the boundaries with them. And just like that simple article completely changed my mindset. And I thought, wow, what if as parents, we could see this problem as an opportunity, and not only an opportunity to teach our kids, but an opportunity to connect with them. And so all of these tech discussions, I decided, okay, we're going to connect first as a family. And I think, a lot of families are familiar with this. They might do a family council meeting or just like a family night. But that's kind of the whole idea, is we're connecting first. And then we go into this discussion. And my kids know I like whiteboarding, like pulling out a whiteboard or a flip chart and like, let's write this out. And part of it is just because I'm very visual. And so that's not unusual for my kids, but some families, it might just be a conversation around the dinner table or around a bowl of ice cream. I don't think it has to be super formal, but we just made a thumbs up and a thumbs down list of all the things that we loved about technology and all the things that we knew we needed to watch out for. Like what are the pros and cons? And thumbs up and thumbs down works really well for kids because they know what that means. And our kids had so many great ideas and had even shared things that I hadn't thought of, certain pitfalls of technology. And that's really how it started. And I liked that because at that point, we weren't making any decisions. We didn't set up any rules or any boundaries. We just had a conversation about that skill of discernment, which is something else that Richard Eyre talked about, that we could see this as an opportunity to teach our kids the skill of discernment, which is to be able to tell the difference between good and bad. And that's so important because we're not always going to be there. The filters that we put in place in our home are not always going to be there. Our kids are going to go to school, they're going to be on the bus, they're going to go to their friends' houses. And in all those places, we're not going to have like the perfect scenario where mom and dad are there or the filters are in place. And so we have to start from that place of that framework of teaching. And that's really where it began.
At the end of Andrea's 10 discussions, the idea is to have a family tech plan that all of the family has helped to create, including a vision for what you want your tech culture to look like, as well as specific rules and boundaries. Again, we'll talk more about those boundaries in the next episode or two. Alex Fales is the youngest of the moms I interviewed about tech, so she actually grew up with a family tech plan herself.
I always thought a family media plan was something like really strict and formal, because growing up we often had one and it was like pasted up in our front room, which I think there are good things about it. But right now it's kind of just like this continuing conversation of like what our rules and plans are. But I do think it's important to let your kids have input on what that plan is. Like let them, what's important to them with technology, and like let them help create the rules and create the plans, because they're smart people and they have good perspectives on things, and they'll probably have a lot to offer to your plan that you create.
Such great advice. We'll hear more from Alex in the next section. The fifth tip is a hard one, but you knew it was coming. This is the part of the podcast where I say that before we can talk about our family tech culture, we have to examine how we as parents use and think about our own screen time. Here's Andrea Davis's experience with this.
Anyone that has a preteen or a teen starts to realize how much teens hate hypocrisy. You really don't love it when you tell them to do one thing, but you're doing something else. And so I thought, yeah, I guess I need to leave the screen out of the bedroom. And so since then, so yeah, that's been like 3.5 years ago, I've kept my phone in the charging station at night instead of taking my phone into the room. I just don't even carry it around in my pocket anymore, because then it will end up going other places in the house. So I just leave it in the charging station, or sometimes it's sitting on the kitchen table, but I don't take it. And one of the reasons why is because I realized too, in my early days of parenting, I didn't have a smartphone. So there wasn't that distraction. But with my younger kids, I noticed like I'd be giving one of them a bath, or I'd be reading Harry Potter, and all of a sudden my phone would ding or buzz. And then I would think, oh, I've got to answer that. I need to respond to this person right away. And I realized, no, we live in this always on culture. That doesn't mean that that person needs me right now. The person that needs me most is right in front of me. That's the kid that I'm reading to, or the kid that I'm bathing, or, now with my older kids, it might be the teen that is telling me about something that seems totally silly and unimportant, but just like listening and making the eye contact and paying attention. And so that was one of the big things that I think was a real struggle for me in the beginning.
This is where Alex Fales comes in. Alex is a mom of 2 kids. One just turned 2 and one is 18 months old, so she's just starting the parenting adventure. Because her kids are so young, she focuses her advice to parents and their own relationships to technology. The cool thing about Alex's perspective is that as a digital native, she now knows the tech world from both perspectives, the child and the parent.
Your screen time use as a parent is the number one predictor of how your kids will use screen time, more so than setting up their own screen time boundaries and managing theirs. And so I feel really passionately about modeling and working on my own screen time to teach my kids, more so than just deciding what they can and can't watch and how much they can watch or whatever.
So what's your strategy for keeping your own screen time in check?
I think my biggest thing, I guess kind of 2 things that come to mind. One, focusing on how is media, or how are screens serving me, and how can I make them serve me more? And then if I find that like I'm quote unquote serving my screens more than they're serving me, what's triggering that? Like usually there's some sort of trigger where like I'm bored or I'm lonely or I'm having some sort of uncomfortable emotion, and I'm like turning to my screens and serving my screens more.
Yeah, and it's an interesting concept. Your screen serving you and you serving your screen. I like that discussion.
Yeah, how are my screens helping me? And I want to focus on that and really set up my life in a way that my screens can help me. And then if I notice that they're pulling away from my life or harming me or my kids in some way, then I want to make changes so that that's not the case.
How do you look at the time you spend on screens and evaluate it in the moment? How do you decide if this is a positive or a negative in the moment? And how do you train yourself to be aware of that?
Yeah, I think something that I've thought a lot about is just, I guess, taking some time to think about what you value and what's important to you. I think especially as I'm raising little kids, and there's a lot of, like, there's a lot of different ways to mom to raise kids. And so just thinking about what's important to me. And then when I'm going throughout my day and I don't know, kind of when you're just kind of like, don't feel good, like, okay, what am I doing? Or maybe how am I using screens that's not aligning with what's important to me? And then just living your life out loud, like talking out loud about, you know what, I just wasted too much time on my phone and I'm feeling blah and I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm going to put my phone away.
What a great tip to actually say out loud when you feel like it's time to put down your phone. And if your kids hear you talking to yourself, so much the better. They already think you're weird, and it's actually a great way to model your own thought processes about phone use. Alex doesn't just talk out loud about how being on her phone makes her feel, but she talks about what she's doing on her phone.
I use my phone for so many things. I use it for ordering groceries, and I use it for studying scriptures, and I use it for planning things and texting people to make plans. Like, I use my phone a lot for relatively good things, but when my kids see me, all they see is a phone in front of my face. And so I'm like, I'm that person at that party that's just has my phone in front of my face. And so that's something that I've tried to be really intentional about, is a lot of times I'll just speak out loud what I'm doing on my phone. Say to my son, do you want to help me? I'm ordering groceries. What should we make for dinner this week? Just involving them and speaking out loud with what I'm doing on my phone.
And probably most importantly, she lets her kids know when she messes up.
Often in the afternoon it's kind of like the roughest time of the day. It's not enough time to go anywhere. The kids are more fussy. We're like trying to make dinner. Anyways, it's just kind of it's a hard time of day. And so it's really easy for me to want to go on Instagram to get a break from my kids. Like, I just need a break from you guys. I want to go on Instagram. And so probably a couple of weeks ago, I had gone on Instagram in the afternoon and my son was needing something and I was wanting a break from him. And so I was scrolling on there and he's kind of nagging me. And then I was like, I kind of like realized what I was doing. And so I got out and I was like, I'm so sorry, Beckham. I was on Instagram and I wish I would have been present with you. I'm going to go put my phone away in my room and I'm going to be present with you. And so just talking out loud about mistakes you're making, how you want to be using technology, and just letting them know and being okay with being imperfect.
I love this advice, especially because a few weeks ago, my son and I were talking and I asked him what I could do better as a parent if he could choose one thing. I was surprised when he said that the one thing is that I really zone out when I'm using my phone and I don't even notice when he's trying to get my attention. Wake up call. We talked about how sometimes I'm doing important things on my phone, like texting someone or responding to an email, and I just can't talk right at that moment. And then we talked about how I can be more aware of it and try to use my phone less. And we came up with a plan so if he needs me while I'm on my phone, he can put his hand on my shoulder so I know he wants my attention, and I can either ask him to wait while I finish or I can take a break. Then I can do the same for him. We all make assumptions, and we usually assume that the other person is just wasting time on their phones. One day I thought that same son was just vegging out and playing games on his phone on a Saturday, and I came into his room to get him to stop. Instead, I found out that he was making an awesome animation. Had he been drawing on paper, I would have just left him to it without saying a word, but his creativity wasn't less valid or valuable just because it was on a device. The sixth tip comes from Hillary Wilkinson, an educator and a founding member of an organization called Healthy Screen Habits, whose mission is to empower families to create healthy habits for screen use and maintain technology as a tool, never as a replacement for human connection. Hillary also hosts the organization's podcast called Healthy Screen Habits. You can basically find an episode on any challenge you're having with screen time. It's so great, and Hillary does a really good job. In fact, Hillary's entire interview was so great that it will actually be our next episode, so be sure to tune in 2 weeks. One of my favorite tips from Hillary is to utilize and respect our kids' expertise.
Developmentally, our teens are in a place where they prioritize peer relationships over parents. I mean, This is how it's how we've evolved as a species, right?
Yep.
And we have to recognize that the phone holds the key to their peer relationships. So the tech is going to win. So we have to become allies. So that's kind of, you've got to like crack this code a little bit. Yeah. And one of the best ways that I have found to connect with my own teens is to make them the expert.
Boy, have I found this to be true, especially when it comes to finding ways around the boundaries I set up.
What's amazing to me is how they outsmart me, but it's not coming from a place of like devious behavior. I'm just watching them navigate their world.
Yeah.
And
like,
I'm going,
look what I can do.
how are you doing that? Yeah. And they're like, oh, it's just this and that, which also goes back to that thing of putting your child in the expert seat for, they can teach you a lot. I do have a social media account and I do post things, and my daughter had done a picture that I wanted to know how to do that, but she was the one that taught me. And so, but I don't think we should use them only for that, like, oh, what's the hippest, coolest way to use things? I think the real like truth telling starts coming out when you say, hey, I just saw this report that stated that most cell phone usage is starting in 4th and 5th grade now. Like, what do you think about that? Like, what are your thoughts? And so I've really enjoyed kind of getting their perspective on things. And it helps me both with that most important filter of, connection with my kids, but also it keeps me grounded in reality of what do they think? What do they care about?
Catherine Perlman also suggests that we make an effort to learn and even participate in the tech our kids love.
Parents should try and be curious with their kids. Instead of lecturing or, saying bad things about social media, I think that the more parents get into what their kids are into. So if your kid is really into TikTok, sit down and watch your TikTok videos with your kid. Find out what it is that they're doing. Try and relate to them on what it is they're doing. Like, I could care less about video games, but my son really likes video games. And so I could either lose him and just be like, that's a silly game. I don't know why you spend so much time on that. Or I can sit with him and kind of learn what he's doing, hear his friends talking, see what he's learning in the game. And then as I want to, I could advise. But I think, we have to approach it in a more positive light, that, not all technology is bad. And truthfully, all technology has pros and cons, all of it. And so to be mindful of what those issues are so we can keep our kids safe. But I think at the same time, not lose them to, this other world that they're in, to try and adapt by doing it with them.
I saved the most positive and most fun tip for last. It's also the best way to follow tip 1 and stop fearing tech. But really, we've been talking about this tip all along. It's to use tech to connect with your family. There are so many ways to do this. We'll start with some ideas for families with young kids, courtesy of Alex Fales again.
There's so many fun things you could do with technology. I was watching my nieces and nephews last week, and we made a baking show. So we stuck my phone up and we filmed ourselves making cookies, and then I showed them how to edit the video. Very simple, not very well made. Put a little music to it, and then we watched the baking show while we ate our cookies. Just simple things like that are so fun. So I think just saying those things out loud, like, isn't this awesome? We can use these screens for these fun things. You can have a dance party together. That's one of our favorites, is just pulling up some music on my phone and having a dance party. You can even, they have like Just Dance YouTube videos if you want to like actually do that. We love doing workout videos together. Again, I love like dance workouts, or honestly any workout video. One of my son's very favorite things is looking at pictures together on my phone. So I have an album in my phone and it's called B's Favorites. And it just has all these pictures of people he loves or like fun memories that we've had together. And it's so fun. He'll ask several times a day, pictures, pictures, pictures. But it's really fun to just talk about people that we love, or to share, like talk about memories that we've had together. And that's been a really fun one, is to look at pictures together. I don't know if you've heard of Skillshare, or even just YouTube works fine, is learn a skill with your child, like anything that they might be interested, or even that you're interested in, and just pull them along with you. Like there's so many cool things you can learn online, like cake decorating, or animation, or video editing, or some
Or backflips. That's what my son showed me this thing on how to spot him. So we'd watch him together, like, and I'd figure out how to spot him, and he would figure out how to do the backflip.
Awesome. See, like that, it's so cool, like what we have available. And so just learning something together and doing it together, or baking, or I don't know, just whatever you're into, you can look up cool things. Another one that I think is actually really important, especially as kids get older, is to create posts together. So like, create a post together, and that you can teach them about like how to use social media to share goodness, or and what's appropriate to share and what's not appropriate to share, and let them have say in what you want to share. And then also, same thing, I think it's helpful to go on social media together and show them how it can be like a positive experience on there. So like comment on people's posts, uplifting things, or respond to people's stories, or just kind of show them what it looks like. Again, like back in the day, kids could see everything you did, but now kids don't see what you're doing on social media unless you have them sit down with you and you show them what you're doing on there. And then the last one I think is obvious, but FaceTiming people. Like we FaceTime my mom almost every day. And it's actually great because she started reading books to my son while I make dinner. And it's amazing. Like that afternoon slug that we were talking about, it makes it so much better when he gets to read books with grandma.
For the family Alex grew up in, movies were a great way to connect and a gateway to good conversation.
When you're watching a movie as a family and like something that doesn't resonate with what you believe or what you teach comes up, talk about it. Just bring it up. My parents did this all the time. And like, we always teased them about it. Because like, can we just enjoy the movie? Like every time we'd come home from the theaters and they'd be like, you know, I didn't like when this happened because it portrayed that premarital sex is okay and doesn't have any consequences, but that's not the truth. You know, they would always talk about it. At the time, it was really annoying. And not that you intentionally want to show your kids bad things, but it does provide an opportunity to teach them what you believe and teach them truths when things do come up in movies. Just talk about it.
Jen Brimhall started a website called raisethegood.com based on this premise that media can be a very positive force for teaching values and building a healthy family culture. She shares so many resources and movie lists for uplifting media. Here's what Jen had to say about family movie nights.
Aristotle has a quote, says, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And that really, really resonates with me because you can know everything and still be a terrible person, right? And so I feel like sometimes in our educational system, we forget to educate the hearts of our kids. And movies in particular have a way of doing that in a really powerful way, with the images, with the music, with, you know, their storytelling abilities. They really have a way of touching us for good or for bad, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, we approach tech in a way where it feeds our hearts and it feeds our minds and it feeds our connection. And that's how we approach it. We try to watch movies about real heroes. We try to watch, YouTube clips and documentaries and different things like that teach us emotional intelligence. We just watched this last weekend, 12 Angry Men, that old movie. And as we watched it, I said, you guys, look at the emotional intelligence of each of these characters. How is this juror acting, and how is that juror acting, and who do you respect the most? Who accomplishes the most? And so it's great for being able to, just pause for a minute or talking after the show to say, what did you think of that? Who do you want to be in that scenario? And it's really just a great way, because my kids get tired of listening to me lecture them, right? And I get tired of lecturing them too. But they learned a lot about emotional intelligence from watching that show. They learned what kind of a person they want to be without me really saying a whole lot. And so it's just a powerful teaching tool.
Another great way to connect with our kids through tech can actually be through social media. For all its dangers, it isn't all bad. Here's Hillary Wilkinson.
My son goes to school out of state, and he and I will send memes back and forth to each other. Probably 2 to 3 a day. And he and I have a very similar sense of humor. So he'll find a new account that is very funny, and he'll send me a clip and be like, you should check this guy out. And, I'll send him something, that I thought was funny as well, or something I thought he'd be interested in. And so that is a way that he and I have completely stayed connected, that I realized my daughter did not have. And my daughter and my son have a very close relationship. I've always been very, very tight. And I want to continue that. And so that is also the reason why I was like, okay, she's learning how to drive. We're also going to take our first steps into social media. And we're we just started her own account, and every family gets to choose it for themselves. Some people say my kid's been on social media since they were 10. Other people say my kid's not going to have any of their own social media until they're 18. For our family, I want to give her time to have problems with it and still have a safe place to fall, so we can help work through things until she's out on her own. That is one of those things where I recognize that the communication of choice for my son is more in the DMs and the sharing of quick little funnies back and forth than a long text or a call. And because my daughter did not have the platform, they were starting to lose touch with one another, because she would send him a text and she'd send him, a thick text, and he'd reply back with one line, just because he's a guy of few words. He always has been, and so I was like, okay, wait a minute. But it was very cute to see how excited he was that she was on Instagram now as well. And he immediately set up a group chat thing for us to all share memes on. And he put in a few that he knew she'd right away. And I was like, okay, this was the right move for this time in our family.
Yeah. And here's another connection tip from Hillary.
So if you want to build a more tech-friendly culture, what I recommend easiest thing in the world to start generating family playlists on Spotify or whatever, and just have each and put in 5 songs. And then when you have the playlist going, whether you eat dinner with music or whether you drive with music, you kind of try and guess who was it who put this song on and stuff. So it brings connection, so it makes it a little bit of a game. So that's a very easy one to do.
And of course, there's texting, which by now feels like old school technology.
One thing that I always talk about is with teenagers, texting is another way to talk to your teen in a way that's much easier for them. So if you think your kid is going to tell you their problems face to face, that's not happening. Most teens have a hard time initiating the conversation, but they have a lot easier time texting. And so if I see my daughter is going through something and she can't talk about it, I might just say, text me text me what's going on. And that will start the conversation and break the ice. And then we could bring it offline again and then talk in person. But, there's so many fun things that kids are doing in terms of making videos, and parents can do all that stuff with their kids.
This is by no means an exhaustive list of all the ways we can connect with our family and friends through technology. And none of these things are new, but sometimes we just need a reminder of all the good that technology brings into our lives, especially when we feel afraid or even just annoyed by the extra workload this digital realm ironically brings to motherhood in the name of progress and efficiency. Stay tuned for Hillary Wilkinson's interview on April 12th and how she manages screen time on April 26th for a continuation of this important conversation. Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.